And what got me into a story is I went scuba diving on a scientific expedition just off the coast of Spain, Mallorca, and we were attacked underwater by modern day pirates. They cut across our bubbles, and they had two pendant anchor hooks over and over and over above bubbles, trying to gaff us and pull us out to sea. We didn't know this, but we were in the middle of a hot black market antiquities expedition. We were there trying to find Roman wrecks from 2,000 years ago. We were pulling up pottery and stuff, and we had no idea they were stealing this stuff and selling it to museums all over the world. And I said, if I get out of this alive, I'm going to write a book about it. And that's how it started.
You are now tuning in to the Roughnecks Podcast with your host, Cole Nixon. Much love.
What's up, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of the Roughnecks Podcast. But before we dive into today's episode, we have to talk about Desert Fox Golf. What can I say about this company? They have been great. They have these really cool tumblers that hold 17 ounces of your drink of choice with a nice screw-on lid and a slide top for easy sipping. I may have 4 of these tumblers myself. They may have even made the Roughnecks tumblers for the Roughnecks volleyball tournament we held at Newark Station. But along with these tumblers, they also have something called the phone caddy. It is the best phone holder in all of golf. I have one of these. Reno does as well now. It holds your phone in a perfect spot on the golf cart. So say goodbye to throwing your phone in the cubby or in your pocket or even in your bag. You have to check out Desert Fox Golf. Head over to desertfoxgolf.com and see for yourself. And when you make your purchase, be sure to use the promo code Roughnecks for 10% off your order. But let's get into today's guest. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Roughnecks Podcast. Today, I have a special guest joining us. It is a different type of episode than probably I've done. It is not the first time I've had an author on the podcast, but a little bit different than the type of books that I typically read. But I'm very happy to have Gary on the podcast. Gary, welcome to the Roughnecks Podcast.
Thanks very much, Cole. Pleasure to be here.
I like to kind of kick off the episode. I used to do backgrounds on people and would miss so much stuff. So I kind of like to allow a guest to give a background on who they are. So just kind of real quickly, give us a rundown of who Gary is.
Okay. Well, I am a novelist. I have my 10th book just came out, Rumor of Evil. I taught at Northeastern University in Boston for over 40 years. I taught really fun courses that I had started, science fiction, horror fiction, modern bestsellers, detective fiction, and fiction writing. And now I've retired so I can write full time. The 10th novel is Rumor of Evil. It just came out to rave reviews that we're really pleased with. And it's the first of a series. The second one is done, probably come out next year. And the third I'm partway through. And I live here just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to talk obviously a lot about the Rumor of Evil. I did finish reading the book. It is I'm not much of a fictional reader. I usually read a lot of nonfiction type books. Sure. And I read this book and I was honestly very, I don't know why I don't read more fictional, because it is a very great book. It kept me interested the whole time. And I kind of wanted to ask, first, before we go into the book itself, kind of go back a little bit of when did writing start for, when and why did you kind of start writing?
Okay, well, in high school, I did a lot of writing papers and stuff that were assigned to me, but I had 2 uncles that were scientists. One was a chemist, one was a metallurgist, and I had read science fiction by the pound, so I wanted to become a nuclear physicist and invent a rocket that would take me to the stars. In my second year at Worcester Polytechnic Institute here in Massachusetts, I was doing much better with words than I was subatomic particles. So I decided that when I graduated, I should have something equivalent to an English degree. And I took courses at different schools. And so then I went on for a master's and a doctorate. And I knew that I wanted to write fiction. But I decided that the only way to learn how to write fiction was to teach other people's fiction. So I essentially learned how to read when I became an English professor. That is, I looked at other people's books the way a carpenter looked at a house, studying the angles and how they got in and out of scenes and et cetera, et cetera. So my office mate happened to be Robert Parker, who he passed away 10 years ago, but he had written 60 books and very famous for his Spencer detective series. And I watched him demythologize the process. He wrote the book over a year, sent it in, got published, and did well. And so I was kind of chomping at the bit. And I wanted to write, but I didn't have a story. And what got me into a story is I went scuba diving on a scientific expedition just off the coast of Spain, Mallorca. And we were attacked underwater by modern day pirates. They cut across our bubbles, and they had 2 pendant anchor hooks over and over and over above bubbles, trying to gaff us and pull us out to sea. We didn't know this, but we were in the middle of a hot black market antiquities expedition. We were there trying to find Roman wrecks from 2,000 years ago. We were pulling up pottery and stuff, and we had no idea they were stealing this stuff and selling it to museums all over the world. And I said, if I get out of this alive, I'm going to write a book about it. And that's how it started. Called Atlantis Fire. Came out early 80s. Yeah.
It's weird how it all started. That's not a typical, I feel like, start for someone.
Right. No,
but
I don't recommend it.
Yeah, it's definitely not something you want to go try to have happen to you.
Right.
Where do your ideas come from? Obviously that one, how that came about, but for your other books, because you like you said, you have over 10 books now. So where do you get the ideas from?
Right. I mentioned that I taught a course in science fiction, and because my colleagues were chagrined that I was teaching something that they considered kiddie litter, I had to pick out titles that were respectable. And of course, I started with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which has, informed all the science, watch out what you wish for, the dangers of technology, etc. And so that I wrote a book called Rough Beast, about something bad getting in the water and affecting a child, and there's a cover-up that goes right to the White House. And that kind of came out of experience, because the next town over, there are bad chemicals getting into the water and causing cancers in people, and particularly in children. So I wrote a kind of a cautionary book, and that did well. And the publisher said, give us more of the same. And I said, more of the same what? They said, high concept. I said, well, stop there. What does a high concept mean? Something that appeals to the fantasies of fears of a large readership. A breakthrough in science, focused on the family, strong female character, because 80% of the novels in America are purchased by women over 50. So I got that as a charge, kind of assignment. So I was constantly looking for new ideas of scientific breakthrough. And the next book was something called Elixir, and about an anti-aging drug, which is live indefinitely at the highest fantasy one could have. And then I went on from there and there and there. And this, Rumor of Evil, is the first of a series of a cop novel. I've done 2 other books that had cops in them, but this is 2 detectives, and I'm going to continue with those 2 for the next several books. Yeah.
So I kind of going into the book a little bit too. I wanted to ask, because you did something without giving too many, I can't even giveaways of what actually happens in the book.
Sure.
You kind of bounce back and forth of flashbacks, essentially from 19 years ago to back to present day, and the 19 years ago was a whole different character than the main character of the book. Why did you decide to do that? And I'm like, what was the idea behind that? Yeah. And just kind of why did you decide to do that?
That's a good question, Cole. So I knew that I wanted to have a double layer. The upper layer would be the contemporary investigation, who left the body, who in the opening paragraphs of the novel. A detectives find a woman hanging from a tree in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but she's too well dressed. She's perfumed. She did not get dressed up to hang herself. And they smell her rat. This is staged. So I wanted to have that investigation go from beginning to end and get the perpetrator at the end. But I wanted that to be a cover-up, that murder to be a cover-up of a backstory. And this is where it gets interesting. like any other crime novelist, or many other crime novelists, I have a file of true crimes, really disturbing, strange, bizarre, real life crimes. And one of them jumped out at me from about 2014. And you may have heard of it. It's referred to as the Slender Man case. Two 12-year-old girls lured a 12-year-old friend into the woods and stabbed her 19 times. Luckily, she survived, and the two girls are still in psychiatric institutions. So I was fascinated. How do young adolescents, not even teenagers, commit such barbaric act? And they told the police that they seriously believed, that if they did not kill their girlfriend, Slender Man, which is an internet faceless cartoon character who, it's like a Pied Piper. He's attracted to young children and does terrible things. That Slender Man would kill their families if they didn't sacrifice their friend. And this is bizarre. And then I looked into more about those two kids and more about what is a real scourge of adolescence is bullying. And I got great, in the research I had done, got interesting portraits of both the bullies and the bullied. And so it was easy to come up with a bully, kind of a smart alpha kid who, wants to impress their friends. They're superior and powerful. And they always pick on somebody who is different. A kid who is maybe soft or oversized or undersized, tall and gangly, or walks with a limp, or has a foreign accent. So I wanted to have essentially an outsider to the accepted adolescent norms of behavior and what are cool kids are like. And so the backstory, I have a 16-year-old exchange student, a girl, who is of Romani or Roma extraction, sometimes known as gypsies. And she comes from a pig farm in rural Slovakia. That's about as outside as you can get. And she's very pretty and she's very smart, but she's from a foreign country. She's got an accent. She's got strange braids the side of her head, and she has hand-me-down clothes, and she speaks with an accent. And so she is set up 4 months to live in the home of the host family in upscale Lexington, Massachusetts, nearby. And they have the father built a tree house in the backyard for the kids. In any case, the teenager in that family and all her friends at school, where Badima, they end up calling her Lulu, where Lulu goes to school, think it's kind of cool. They're going to Americanize her. So they give her a name, Lulu, and they bring her to the mall and get her better clothes and gets rid of the braids. And things are going well. They introduce her to hot dogs and backyard barbecues, and they bring her to a Pearl Jam concert, etc. But I needed something to turn dark. And there's a pizza party for all these teenagers. And at the pizza party, the kids are making out and dancing and all that. And one kid says, "What do you do when you're not slaughtering pigs back in Slovakia?" She says, "I read palms." "Oh, how cool. Would you read our palms?" So all the kids bring their hands to her. And they're having fun. You're gonna get a scholarship. You're going to go to such and such a school. And then all of a sudden she freezes. She looks at a young woman's hand and she freezes, and I can't go on, and she bolts. And then dark stuff happens. I need dark stuff because that's what's going to lead up to the tragedy at the end of her storyline. Bad things happen to some of the kids and some of the kids' family, and then the rumors fly, as in the title, Rumors of Evil. Wait a minute, she's Roman. Aren't they gypsies? And don't gypsies put curses on people? And didn't they in olden days start the bubonic plague? And don't they pray to Satan and drink the blood of Christian babies? And aren't they witches in disguise? So on. So I essentially got all the damning myths I could get about Romani people, and I just had these kids in their mind, like these Slender Man. This gives scapegoating kinds of myths. And then on Halloween night, she liked to sleep out in the tree house and look at the stars. And Halloween night, she's up there sleeping. It catches fire, and she's dead. And her death is connected to the cover-up in the opening scene of the investigation. Yeah. Double layers. Yeah.
So, when you're writing books like this, especially, do you already know where you're going to take the book at the end? Or like, do you have the ending in mind and you just have to get to the end? Or are you working through the story and then taking it wherever you feel like it should go?
Well, I think that the second thing you had, I have a vague idea how it's going to end, who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. And I don't outline anymore, but I do kind of bullet points and kind of define an arc, story arc. And also, I know who is going to be the bad person, one of those kids, and maybe even the parents, are about 6 or 7 people. And so the challenge of the backstory is coming up with convincing motives for all these characters. So the reader is saying, I have no idea who did it. And then at the end, we get the surprise, hopefully surprise. But I know kind of where I'm going. And instinct tells me if I'm going the wrong direction, don't do this. But you're constantly rewriting as you go along too, to get it better and have it work out. But yeah, I used to outline extensively, and I just gave up on that because I once had a 90-page single-space outline. I mean, 2 of those, and you got a whole book,
Mm-hmm.
So, and you veer off someplace about a third of the way. This is ridiculous. I didn't even follow my outline. So now I just jump in. It's a dark and stormy night and see where it takes me.
Oh, I understand that 100%. I used to outline my podcast like 4 pages on a script, and then now it's like, all right, here's my bullet points. I'll go from there.
Right,
So I understand exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
But it is kind of cool to hear you talk about how yes, it is a fictional story, but it is based on real life things.
Right.
Is that very common? Like, does that happen a lot in the writing world, or is that just something that you prefer to do?
It happens. I don't know if it's a lot, but it happens. I mean, think of Silence of the Lambs. I mean, terrific book, terrific movie. And that's based on a couple of real crimes. Some guy out of Michigan named Edward Gein skinned and killed women. And then Ted Bundy, who was brilliant, killed 20 or 30 people. And they were very smart, and they were psychopaths. And that was one. But a classic one is Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, which is really based on the killing of Charles Lindbergh's baby way back in the 20s or 30s. And this is a classic whodunit story and made into at least 3 movies. So a lot of people do use backstories, use as inspirations true crimes, and there are many others too. But this one is the first time I actually use a very specific, the Slender Man case, very specific crime. In fact, I think I do mention it in the book when a couple of cops are talking. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to write this book?
About a year, because I retired shortly before I started writing it. Usually it was 18 months when I was teaching full time, or maybe even 2 years. But this was, I really got into this. And my 2 sons are now out of the house. They're adults and living elsewhere. And my wife and I, when we socialize, we do that. But, and the older you get, the less sleep you need. So I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I read the emails and the headlines. And I usually write for 8 or 10 hours a day, take a bike ride or go to the gym in the middle. But I need open blocks of time. And since I'm retired now, I have those, and I can get in. I cannot write in little patches. I can write for half an hour. I can't do that. I mean, you gotta have the wind up time too, to get your head back into where you're trying to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the people that, like, once you get into a groove, like, you just kind of have to keep going.
Yeah.
Now, do you ever get into a groove, go back and look at some things, and then be like, wait, I got to go back and kind of change that? Like, do you already have, like, is there times where you write a bunch of stuff out and then realize, like, you can't go this direction, and you almost have to scratch, not the entire thing, but a big part of it?
That's absolutely true. I mean, one of the mantras of writing teachers is writing is rewriting. You're constantly rewriting. I mean, the thing is, you never really finish a novel. You just kind of meet a deadline. I mean, I can go back in this novel and change wording here and there, little micro stuff, but you can go nuts doing that. And someone wants the book to, put it into production. But I'm constantly rewriting. What I do is, if I come to a kind of a roadblock, I will go back over and over the previous chapter and polish that until I kind of get a direction on where it's going to go, and that may give me some ideas. And I think that is what many people do. Some people still outline extensively. I can't follow that because it took me down rabbit holes I didn't want to go down and more useful. Yeah.
So this is going to be a series of books, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So is this going to be continued based on the same, if I can ask, is it the same type of story, like same character, or is it based on different things?
Yeah, it will be the same. There'll be 3 characters I'll continue, and that's a plus because you don't have to invent these 3 main characters. The 2 detectives, Kirk and Mandy, and Kirk's wife. The challenge is not so much coming up with a new crime. The challenge is continuing to make the main character, particularly through whom the story is told, Kirk Lucian, empathetic. Most readers read detective novels for the detective as opposed to detection. I mean, they're going to be clever and smart, and so they're going to solve the crime unless they're really stupid or they're distracted or something. But what endears readers to the main character is you have to give them baggage. And so there are 2 quests in every novel. The outer quest, cop novel, who left the body in the opening chapter and getting the villain at the end. But the personal quest is sometimes harder to come up with. That is, give them baggage. Give them demons that are really eating away at them. Like they're hooked on booze, they're alcoholic, and they're fighting that, or they're hooked on drugs, or they feel guilty because in a previous investigation, their partners were killed and you've got the survival thing, or you're estranged from your lover, your partner, your children, and you're suffering that all the time. So in the opening book, what I decided to do is Kirk is married to Olivia. And a year or so before the book opens up, their daughter at 14 or 15 years old was killed in a hit and run accident. And I'm never going to solve that. That's got to be that open wound in each. And they just fell into such a funk, particularly he did. He became dysfunctional and could not attend his wife Olivia's needs. And they end up separating. And it's interesting, Cole, because if you look into the research on married couples who lose their children, many of those marriages break up. You get blameworthy, and you get, being married to you reminds me of our grief and our loss. I can't take this anymore. I've got to move on with my life, or I'm going to, blow my brains out. So I left that. That was the baggage. The next book, I've got to come up with new baggage. And the baggage is, okay, we're back together again. And should we have another child? And she says, no, I'm 42 years old. He says, look, let's give dead Megan a brother or sister and continue. As you go down the line, you get to book number 10, you kind of run out of stuff you run out of demons, you resolve those in the other books. So that is the challenge of series. And so the third one I'm working on, I've got that stuff worked out. But I mean, if I'm down to 5 or 6 in the future, I'm going to be struggling, scratching my head.
I am curious, what do you think is like the typical length for a series? Like, what is a good length for a series that people typically stick to?
Yeah, that's almost the demands of the publisher. They want you to go almost indefinitely, because once they have sold this detective and the readers like him or her, then you got to keep that up. So you have to keep on very creatively coming up with new storylines, new investigations, which are easy, and the crimes can go on forever. But also the personal stuff, and they come up. And writers who have detective series end up coming up with their new demons, new baggage, and I'm not worried about that. But that would be more of a challenge. But I think almost as many as you can squeeze out of an author. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, do you have a special place that sometimes you go to write, or is it just typically you're at your home? Is that where you do all your writing, or do you go somewhere else sometimes if you need, inspiration or ideas?
Sure. Sure, that's a good question. I usually here in my office in the house, and if I'm invading my wife's space and she wants the office, she has, the other place I go to is a local library. It's a great old, kind of Victorian-looking interior. It's beautiful, and it's nice and quiet. I cannot write with headphones and listening to music. I'm just too distracted with the music, so I need a quiet place and. Where I can just kind of get into my own little zone and do my writing. But the local library is one. I'm no longer at Northeastern, so I'm not using my office, but right down the street is a great little hideaway in the library. Yeah.
What is the editing process like once you finish your book, finish your side of things, then going into the editing side of things? How long does that take? And do you ever have the where you're like, I really like this idea, but maybe the editor does not, or do you edit your own? How does that work for you?
Okay. My wife is a former English teacher too, and she's a fabulous reader. She reads a lot more than I do because I'm spending time writing. And she is really good. And also having taught literature and writing for a long time, when I'm done, I think it's almost there. The editors, and this is interesting, Cole. And you're finding more and more writers are finding this out. If you send a manuscript into the publisher, and then it's usually small tweaking. You said she was born in 1993, and in 1995, here it is. Correcting little errors like that. But what has happened is that publishers are hiring sensitivity editors, so you cannot say anything insulting to the readers. The last book I wrote with Tess Gerritsen, we had a character described as chubby. And so for all the chubby readers out there, we had to change it to he was a big kid. And also, since the majority of readers is female, you have to watch out that you don't offend women by some kind of point of view, unless the point of view character is a real jerk and says stupid things about women. You have to watch out you don't insult them or minorities. I mean, you have to be very careful about the kind of offending readers without making the offenses come to a bad guy or someone who's insensitive, and therefore it works out because it's fiction. So there is that is something that is relatively new, but the editing process, having taught other people's books for a long time, that's pretty clean, except for maybe some minor factual errors or whatever. Yeah.
Are there any authors of you like that you read or anything, or any authors that inspire you to write or inspire some of your books?
Yeah, I think that having taught horror fiction, I became enamored of the writing of Stephen King and Dean Koontz. And particularly Dean Koontz, who was better than he needed to be writing horror. I mean, very smart, character-driven stories. And King had character-driven stories. And for my office mate, Robert Parker, he was great at dialogue. So, and in many of the books I taught in the bestsellers course, including Tess Gerritsen, who we wrote a book together, I find that I'm in many ways in the same category as some of these other writers, or inspired by how they word things. And, as a former English teacher, I go for, as best I can, for fresh expression. So how writers tell their stories is important as the stories they tell, as opposed to, using cliches or stereotypes. I try to stay away from them. So those writers that I mentioned, and many others too. I mean, Louise Erdrich, who wrote a fabulous book called The Roundhouse. It's a crime story in it, and she got a National Book Award. She's a terrific writer, and an Irish writer, Tana French. So the names I just dropped are people whose books I've read and are constantly inspiring. And I can always return to charge my own batteries too. I mean, hoping they're still doing the same good stuff they did when I was teaching the material. Yeah.
The teaching, because you've mentioned teaching, you mentioned that you were a teacher. How much of an inspiration did it have on your writing itself?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, when you really plumb the depths of somebody else's novel, you got it wired. That helped me in my own writing. And how students react to books we had in class is important too. I mean, if they like something, why they liked it, and that informs me what I can do, the direction I can take in the next thing I'm doing. And how they react. Are they interested in a plot-driven story, or they read for plot or read for mystery? I mean, a lot of writers, people who sent in reviews of my book said, I never saw the ending coming. And that's a compliment, because mystery's about puzzle solving. And if you can fool the reader as best you can, that's plus. But and also, if, like I said earlier, if readers like characters, fleshed out characters, that tells me I've got to flesh out my characters. And that's what I really try to do, give them some kind of depth.
Yeah, I definitely can agree. I did not see the ending coming, but what I really liked about the ending was, like, once you know the ending, you start going back through the entire book, like thinking back, like, oh, this part, this part, this part. It all makes sense now. Like, it all was there the whole time. Little clues being left behind that you were supposed to pick up on. That once the ending happens, it all starts to fill in the blanks. So I really did appreciate that. And that book. I'm like I said, I'm not much of a fictional reader, but when I read that book, I'm looking forward to the to continuing down the series. I'll actually be continuing with some fictional books.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
What's up, everybody? I wanted to interrupt today's guest episode for a quick second and tell you guys about Roughnecks merch. If you head over to roughneckspodcast.com, grab yourself some Roughnecks gear. We have many different types of options. There are t-shirts, long sleeves, sweatshirts, hats, coffee cups, tumblers, and much more. My personal favorite is the Take No Bull shirt, or the classic black Roughnecks t-shirt. That was the first merch ever sold, so if you were looking for an original, that is the way to go. Buying merch and wearing it out is one of the best ways to support the podcast, so head over to roughneckspodcast.com and grab yourself some Roughnecks merch. Let's get back to today's guest.
When Tess Garrison and I did the last book, we got 2/3 through it. We had no idea who the bad guy was or who the villain was. And we had 5 potentials. And it was, how do we trick the reader and pick out one of these and never saw it coming? And then, as you had said, I mean, it's kind of like dropping a pebble in a pond. The ripples go out. We have to go right back to the beginning once we finally decided who the villain was, and adjust every single thing so that it lined up. And so at the end, you're not pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Oh, it all connected, the reader says. So it's sometimes you're doing a lot of rewriting because you don't quite know how you can end your own book.
How is it co-writing a book, like writing a book with somebody else? How does that process work? Because, I mean, it's pretty straightforward of writing your own book, but how is it writing a book with somebody else?
Yeah, I've known Tess Garrison for almost 30 years, and she plugged my books, and I had her come to the bestsellers class 4 or 5 times, and we liked each other's work. I mean, she's a former doctor. I did a lot of biomedical stuff in their earlier books. So we were speaking the same language, and we trusted each other enough so that when I sent her a chapter, she said, okay, change this. And she sent me a chapter. I said, okay, change this. And it just was 18 months. The whole thing was written on emails and 2 telephone calls. And it worked. I mean, it worked until we got 2/3 through and couldn't decide who the bad guy was. But it was just, we meshed very well. And sometimes we learn things about each other's writing or about how we see things. She said, I didn't know men thought that way, because I did all the male point of view chapters. She did all the female point of view chapters. And she checked with her husband and said, yeah, guys think that way. And then I said, do women really object to these things? Said, yes, women do. So we learned stuff, but it worked out well. The book did quite well, too. Yeah, it became international bestseller, in fact. I mean, sold big in Germany and the Netherlands, et cetera. So, it was fun doing. I don't know if we'd do it again, but I'm here if she calls.
That's what I was going to ask. If you would like, what you prefer to do? Probably, I'm assuming write your own books, but which do you prefer to write your own or co-write?
Yeah, I prefer to write my own, as she does too. I mean, she was busy with the Rizzolian Isles next book, and I was busy with the Rumor of Evil. So, yeah, I mean, it's easy. You don't have to go back and forth. But two heads sometimes are better than one, and a few things, yeah, we worked out with each other's kibitzing. So, yeah. But I like working on my own.
I do have a question that is kind of different than the rest of these, but I've been curious about it. It's a very common thing, but the real name versus writing name, what is the reason behind it, if I can ask?
Of course. The legal name is Gary Goshgarian. I was born with that. And about 20 years ago, the book I mentioned earlier called Elixir, about an anti-aging drug, really a high concept. It was optioned for a movie by Ridley Scott, who had just gotten the Academy Award for directing Gladiator. And so it was a hot topic book, and connected possibly to a movie. He renewed the option a second year, but he ended up making Hannibal, which is the sequel to Silence of the Lambs. So the publisher said, we want you to change your name. And I said, because my name is unusual and long. Said, no, that may be true, but we want you to change your name because to make it in America, particularly, you have to do big in the chains. And back then we had Borders and we had Barnes and Noble, and they based their pre-publication purchases on the sales of an author's last book. So let's say the last Goshgarian book, they printed up 10,000 copies and it sold 7,000. Only 7,000 books are going to be ordered for the next one. And they printed up, 80,000, 100,000 copies of Elixir. So they said, we want you to change your name. You're a new kid on the block. I said, my goodness, middle-aged. I have to So they gave me a weekend. They said, call us Monday and let us know what your new name is. So I went to the family tree, and Goshgarian in Armenian is shoemaker, so it's long and back of the alphabet. They said we want it at the front of the alphabet. And my grandfather's name translated as braver person. So I asked my wife and kids, what do you think about Gary Braver? So that's a cool name, except you're anything but brave. It should be Gary Coward, So on Monday morning, I called my editor and got the assistant. And I said, what do you think of Gary Braver? So that's kind of a cool name. Well, that sounds nice. And I jokingly said, can I keep my gender? And I hear, he wants to know if he can keep his gender. And there's this silence. They're thinking, we don't have a female thriller writer yet, like Tess Gerritsen or Karen Slaughter. So I said, wait a minute, I am not going to change my gender. I'm not going to, show up and drag at a signing. I said, I am Gary Braver, not Mary Braver. So in any case, that's where the name change came from.
What would you say is the most difficult part when writing a book?
Ooh, I think finishing it in a way that I am deeply satisfied with. I'm not threatened by, I'm going to hit writer's block, because I don't believe that. That's not a syndrome that really exists, But the hard part, the hard part now is the actual marketing of one's own book. It used to be that, the publisher would, have PR people and take care of that. But now it's kind of incumbent on authors to get out there and stump and set up interviews like this or book, book signings at the libraries or bookstores. So there's a marketing aspect that is now on the shoulders of the writers. But I don't have any issues with the writing process itself.
How important are book reviews in your industry? The reviews I feel like are a big thing, and especially help lead to awards and those kind of things. So how important are book reviews for you?
Pre-publication book reviews are fabulous because and we got some pre-publication raves, a book list and Publishers Weekly and some of the others. They're important because they go to the people in the trade, bookstores and libraries, and so they order based on how well it's been received by the critics. One of the problems today is fewer newspapers and magazines do book reviews. I mean, I'm living in one of the smartest cities in the world, Boston, all the colleges, 25 colleges or so. And the Boston Globe has a pathetic book review section on Sundays. I mean, just 2 pages or so. Whereas the New York Times has the pull-out magazine of the book review section. And they're getting fewer and fewer in newspapers. So you're left with hoping you're going to get pre-publication reviews or a lot of online stuff, and then BookBub and Shelf Life and all the other online reviews become important because they've, in a sense, bumped the newspapers. They're not doing very much book reviewing, so it's a challenge these days. So reviews that are positive really help, and then that gets people to leave reviews on Amazon, and that helps because people go first to Amazon to get a cheaper book, download whatever. Yeah.
So when you're writing a book, does the title come before, during, or after the book is finished, or when does the title actually come into play, and how important is the title of the book?
Sure. I mean, sometimes it hits you like Elixir. I knew it was about an anti-aging drug. I found the word elixir, which means, the fountain of youth. This one, it took me a while, Rumor of Evil. And I had to go back into the book and said, what is this about? And it's about kids believing the rumors they created to scapegoat a person. And sometimes, I mean, you're going on for weeks after you've written the book and say, I don't know what I'm going to call this. And you've got to come up with something catchy and something that would resonate with readers. And so when they walk into a bookstore, I want to get the next book by Gary Braber. It's called, let me think of it now. You want them to have something that sticks in their mind. So, I mean, the titles, I think, are very important. And sometimes you have to bang your head against the wall to come up with one that works.
Which one of your books would you say is your favorite book that you have written? Is there a favorite, or do you have a few that you like, that you prefer? Like, which one would you say do you prefer the most?
Well, that's like your favorite child kind of thing. Every author is told to say it's the one you just finished. So, Rumor of Evil. One of them is a favorite of mine called Gray Matter, because it's about kids, and it's about parents who want to boost the intelligence of their children so they can raise geniuses. And that was quite touching to me because my kids were growing up, and I got to know some of their friends, and some kids had learning disabilities. So it just kind of touched the nerve. So Gray Matter is dear to my heart. Yeah. And the other one would be Elixir, the first one that had Gary Braber as the pen name. But this I'm very pleased and proud of. And I hope we get a lot of readers. Yeah.
So I got a few more final questions for you before we move into some of the final segments. But I wanted to ask, what is your favorite part about writing? What do you enjoy the most about being an author?
Cashing royalty checks. I think the favorite part is somebody saying, this is a really good book with interesting characters and well written. I mean, the 3 things I ask books have, that there's an interesting story, good characters that I can relate to, and good craft, good use of language. So I think those are my guidelines and what I look for in other people's writing too. Yeah.
If you could give one piece of advice to aspiring writers, what would it be? Like, what would be the, maybe not the key advice that will solve all your issues, but like one thing to help them get started at least?
I would tell, and something I've always said, my writing students, read another person's books, an author you want to grow up to write just like, or someone you emulate, someone you highly respect. And as I said earlier, look at their books the way a carpenter looks at a house. Look at how they get in and out of scenes. Look how a strip of dialogue, 8 or 10 inches long on the page, of two characters, and they're distinguished by their word choice, by how they say things, about how they react, how action scenes are usually followed by reflection scenes, fast scenes by slow scenes, just as in movies. You got a big chase, the next scene, the cops are talking over a coffee or a beer. How it's important to show important emotions or actions. Instead of saying, she was angry, have her pick up the coffee cup and smash it against the wall. Show, don't tell. And how in many books, a chapter would end with a cliffhanger. And so the authors imagine it's 3 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning, and you say the person wants to go to bed, but you want to force them to turn the page and at least get into the next chapter. So really study another person's book. And really go slowly. Don't read it for plot. Just read it and study how they do the magic that they may do. And that's what I tell my my writing students. Keep reading and read slowly. Study them. Yeah.
I will say you do a very good job of showing things in your book, because I remember specifically, like at certain moments of the book when I'm reading it, like I have the image in my head. I'm literally visioning what is going on. And I will say also the cliffhanger part, you did a very good job with, especially when you leave it with the present day and then go to 19 years for an episode, 19 years ago for an episode. So then you want to keep reading at least 2 more chapters to
right. Right.
It was very hard to put the book down, and there was many nights where
thank you, Cole. I like hearing that.
Hey, you're in bed. The lights need to turn off so I can go to bed too. But kind of moving into the final segment of the podcast, I do have a question that I like to ask all of my guests, and it is, if you could go back in time and tell your 16-year-old self one thing, what would it be?
Oh boy. Be true to yourself. I mean, I knew I was not going to be a physicist. I knew I wanted to be a writer, and just do everything you can to head in that direction. But also don't regret what you've done. I mean, it's I don't regret having a degree and background in physics, even though I wasn't going to spend my life in a lab. But it's, enjoy what you do, I guess. And I do enjoy what I do. Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things that I've been told my whole life is, no matter what you do in life, just enjoy what you're doing. If you don't enjoy it, then you probably should look for something else to do. You see a lot of people that spend their life working at a job that they so-called like they don't like, or they blah blah blah. But just find what you love to do and try and stick to that. But Gary, thank you very much for coming on to the Roughnecks podcast. I truly appreciate it. If you guys, where can people find and purchase your book?
Sure. I mean, on Amazon, Rumor of Evil, GaryBraver.com, just one word, GaryBraver.com. And there are other platforms, Shelf Life and Kobo and indie books of it, but Amazon's the major one, or GaryBraver.com. Yeah.
Definitely go and get that book, because The Rumor of Evil, I highly recommend it. Like I said, I'm not a fictional reader, but I will be reading more of your books, especially. So definitely go do that, and then leave a rating and review on it when you're done as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you, Cole. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. But until Friday, you guys know the deal. Life is hard, and it's going to knock you down just like a bull does to a bull rider. Don't let that bull of life walk all over you. Get up, grab the bull by the horns, and take control of your life. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Roughnecks podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you enjoyed it, one of the easiest ways to support the podcast is to just share the show. Send it to a friend and go to your favorite listening platform and leave a rating and review. It would be much appreciated. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter on roughneckspodcast.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Roughnecks